Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's solo flight special is being captained by Randy Wright. We know you have a choice in your radio listening pleasure, and we would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please fasten your seatbelts and ensure that all seatbacks and tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked positions. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we cruise above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style. Once again, we thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, I'm going to go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before I may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, I'm sure you all have noticed the rampant amount of chaos that's unfolding throughout our college campuses here in the United States. Apparently, today's current crop of students are frustrated with the fact that they are shouldered with nearly unbearable student loan debt and ever-increasing tuition prices at our institutions of higher education. However, what makes it worse is the fact that they are couching some of their demands and grievances in the language of social justice. Now, as Jeremy and I have oft-times repeated on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, the radical and extremist fringe of the left in America frequently plays a game of semantics where they twist the meanings of words to lull people into a false sense of security, thereby throwing them off the trail of the true and devious nature of what it is the left is trying to accomplish. In this case, social justice is just that. It is a couching word or a weasel word designed to throw you off of the trail of what is actually happening, and that is an attempt to implement social Marxism. Everywhere we turn with the radical and extreme left in America, they are attempting to overthrow the traditional institutions here in the United States, and that includes our institutions of higher learning. It's been a long time since universities in the United States have been focused upon teaching the students to be well-rounded individuals. It used to be thought that our institutions of higher learning were focused on developing a well-rounded individual, thereby preparing them to partake in real-world activities as an adult. Unfortunately, ever since the counterculture revolution of the 1960s, professors have steadily been pushing the envelope to ensure that these ivory towers are nothing short than an institution and shrine for the doctrines of Karl Marx. You can see this in the way that they give glowing reviews to the Communist Manifesto. In fact, they implement it as required reading and teach it as though it is the personal gospel of each and every professor involved with our institutions of higher learning. Unfortunately, what that has done is created generations of students who are ill-equipped and prepared to enter the workforce and be proactive citizens here in the United States. But of course, there's more to it than just that. Jeremy and I have lamented the fact that these institutions of higher learning have done a horrific job of teaching people about their fundamental and unalienable rights as contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. This is a problem that goes much deeper than merely learning. It means that our country is at significant risk because the future generations simply have no idea what their political and national character, heritage, and identity really are. Therefore, if you are lacking a knowledge of what your country is and the foundational principles upon which it is established, you have no idea what is really important. And that makes it all the much easier for nefarious governmental agencies and bureaucracies, which are nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable to the ultimate true sovereigns of the United States, we the people, to fundamentally transform what the United States of America is. That is why President Barack Hussein Obama stated during his 2008 campaign that his ultimate goal, his groundbreaking goal, everything that he was centering his campaign upon, was to fundamentally transform the United States of America. Well, he has had great assistance from the ivory towers in the United States. This is because the professors have not been teaching, they have been indoctrinating. They have been filling our students' heads with this nonsense of cultural Marxism, which is ultimately detrimental to the future of this country, to the foundations of our society, and for the embetterment of the world. Now, they would, of course, come back and defend, rebutting me by saying that, look, what we are doing is important. We're teaching them to be fair and egalitarian towards their fellow human beings. But I respond with saying that is nothing but a bunch of malarkey. All you have to do is look at how they teach and what they teach to realize that our institutions of higher learning in America have become a bastion of left-wing extremism. And as far as I am concerned, that is totally unacceptable. The fact of the matter is, when you look at universities, what is their purpose? What has been the stated purpose of universities going back to the academy system as envisioned and established by Aristotle all those years ago? The purpose was to find knowledge in an objective manner and fashion, to allow the student to create his or her own worldview. That has always been at the core of any liberal arts education. Now, of course, I have to once again turn back to this idea that the radical and extreme fringes of the left use a game of semantics, because liberal, that is a term that has been so perverted and corrupted by the left that its original meaning is all but lost on modern audiences and modern listeners. What liberal really means in the 18th century term of the word is rooted in liberty. Therefore, an 18th century liberal would be one who espoused for a limited, representative Republican form of government. Thus, you can see from this true, adequate, and honest definition of the term liberal that our founding fathers were liberals in the 18th century, in the truest sense and definition of the word. Of course, the professors in these various institutions of higher learning wouldn't want to teach you the true history of our founding fathers or the great journey that led us to our shared United States Constitution. They believe that this notion of negative rights as contained within the four corners of the Bill of Rights is actually detrimental because it gets in the way of government implementing programs which give so-called rights to people. But here's the thing, folks. Going back to the ultimate discovery made by George Mason, when he concluded at the time that he was called upon to help assist in drafting the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, is that each and every American citizen is endowed with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, which means that there is no earthly government body or any other institution which can, in legitimate fashion, strip, abridge, encroach upon, or tear away those fundamental and unalienable rights. Now, I know that the cynical left-winger would come up and say, but what about the criminal justice system? We obviously have a system there that seeks not only to deprive people of their fundamental and unalienable rights, as you call it, but also to ensure that they are locked away. Well, what is the purpose of our criminal justice system? In all actuality and honesty, the purpose of our criminal justice system is to punish those who encroach upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of their fellow citizen. Remember that your fundamental and unalienable rights end where someone else's begins. Therefore, if you utilize your fundamental and unalienable rights in a reckless, arbitrary, and capricious fashion, thereby abridging, encroaching upon, or stripping away of the rights of other people, you have acted in a way that negates your fundamental and unalienable rights, because you have taken away the rights of that other individual who, under our true sense of equality, has equal right to have their fundamental and unalienable rights, just as you have your fundamental and unalienable rights. It is a system that is designed to ensure that society maintains law and order, but also protects and shields the fundamental and unalienable rights of the true sovereigns of the country, which happens to be we the people. But based upon and judging upon what these million student quote unquote marches that have erupted earlier this week have said and their goals, they don't believe that at all. And it's in a way not their fault that they don't believe it. It's because they've never been taught what it is. But that does raise the question of who is at fault, and why have we gone down this path to where our institutions of higher learning are no longer about education, but are rather all about indoctrination, embedding the seed of cultural, governmental, and economic Marxism in the heads of the future generations of the United States. This is a multifaceted problem. It would be easy to point the fingers at the students' parents and blame them for failing to raise the child adequately. However, that is too simplistic and too two-dimensional. If you step back and think about it for a moment, the real problem rests with those nefarious groups that have come forward with generational plans designed to fundamentally transform each and every institution within the United States of America. Those groups are your hardcore extremist left-wing radicals, the ones that have taken the reins of power in the United States of America today, and they are hell-bent to get their radical agenda accomplished, and they are well on their way to doing it. This is why I have so frequently said that we, who are opposed to this radical, fundamental, and destructive transformation of the United States, cannot fall back upon instant gratification schemes. Rather, we have to be just as deliberate as these radical extremist left-wingers to restore our country to a proper functioning as it was intended to be. And of course, what that calls for is strict adherence at all levels of government to the fundamental principles contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. Now, what's interesting is that these extremist left-wingers would point their fingers at me and claim that I am a radical because I am opposed to expanding governmental power and calling for the government to strictly adhere to our constitutional principles. They would say that this deliberately makes me against human rights. Now, I know that I have said this on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, but I don't like the term human rights. Human rights, by its very nature, limits the powers of the rights, limits the scope and applicability of our rights. When I speak of rights, I don't speak of rights that are created by the hands of man. Because if humanity creates rights, then humanity has the ability to take and strip those rights away. Rather, I believe in the fundamental and unalienable rights that our founding fathers spoke of, not only in the Declaration of Independence or the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, but also within our United States Constitution in general, and within the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution in particular. And the reason that I give such impetus and importance to these fundamental and unalienable rights is because those rights are endowed to us by our Creator. That clearly speaks to natural law principles being the ultimate foundation of our constitutional representative Republican system of government. In other words, the government does not have the authority to strip us of these rights which are endowed to us by our Creator. That, of course, is problematic for the radical and extremist left, which have taken over our university systems. This is part of a whole process, a program designed to take at least 100 years to completely, permanently, fundamentally transform the United States of America from the constitutional representative republic that we know and love today to some Marxist utopian paradise. Of course, this again disregards what was actually meant by Sir Thomas More when he penned that piece known as Utopia. More was trying to demonstrate that perfection cannot be achieved on the earthly plane, that humanity will never find perfection while in this life. Therefore, the Latin root of the word utopia actually means no place. That's right, folks. It means that it cannot be achieved here on earth. And this is the type of system that our supposed educators are trying to thrust upon the future generations to wield power here in the United States. Unfortunately, that is the truth, and they have been very successful. Now, it would also be easy to say that these universities, which have been indoctrinating the future generations of America for decades, are finally getting what they deserve as the chickens come home to roost. But again, that is disregarding the fact that these institutions of higher learning wield such great power. Going back to the case of the University of Missouri, which recently ousted its president, there's something important to keep in mind. Yes, I have no doubt in my mind that he adhered to the principles that all radical extremist left-wingers do in this country. But the fact that the University of Missouri capitulated and that he stepped down should be alarming for all Americans, because it means that we are appeasing these radical elements that are wholeheartedly devoted to the destruction of this country as we know and love it. It means that the message that we here at the Wright Flyer are trying to convey to the American citizens, that is, to give you the tools that are necessary for you to gain a fluent working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared Constitution, but also your fundamental and unalienable rights, is all the more difficult, because it means the universities are becoming that much more radical. It will be that much more difficult for our message to penetrate the thick skulls of mush which are the future generations of the United States. And therefore, if we allow this to continue and allow this to perpetuate itself as it has been, then we are going to see the deterioration of the social fabric of the United States of America continue, but at an even greater pace than it was before. That is something that should cause real concern and alarm for every decent, hardworking American man and woman, because it also means that the future of this country is placed into greater uncertainty. Now, I'm not doing this to be an alarmist or one to speak of apocalyptic futures and dystopian futures for the United States of America. I do not believe that they will ultimately be successful, because I know for a fact that the fundamental tenets and principles contained within our shared United States Constitution are based upon ultimate truths, and those ultimate truths are based in reality. In other words, what is true will set you free, and you cannot escape from the truth. Rightness, justice, all of it actually coincides with the truth. And our side, being the side that is a proponent of the United States Constitution and the fundamental principles which underpin it, are the ones based in this truth. And therefore, no matter what these radical, extremist, disruptive left-wingers attempt to thrust upon the American people, ultimately the truth will come to light, and their campaign and their attempts to radically and fundamentally alter the societal fabric of the United States will ultimately fail, because it is not based on the truth. It is based upon these doctrines and principles which are unsustainable, detrimental, harmful, and bigoted. Now, why would I use one of the terms that is a favorite of these so-called social justice warriors that were going out and marching and demanding free education? I would say this because it is once again a perverted term. Just as every other term that these radical and extremist left-wingers touch, justice, social justice, equality, truth, any of it, when they say that, you have to read between the lines to get to the true meaning of the message that they are attempting to articulate. It's not justice. It's not truth. It's not equality. What they are preaching is for a command and control type system where a select few, in other words, an oligarchy, are able to demand what the rest of the decent, hardworking citizens, in the case of the United States, the true sovereigns, are able to do and are disallowed to do. In other words, they think that they are smarter than the rest of us and that they know what is best for us, and therefore we should just bow down, capitulate, and thank them for their benevolence towards us. That is bigotry in its true form and scope. Because if you ever look at the fact that they try and say that they are the agents of tolerance, that they are working on this claim of diversity and ushering forward this new generation of political correctness, which will somehow make our universities a safer, better place, that's just not the truth. They are demanding free education, but then when they go in front of the cameras, they are unable to explain how they would pay for this. They have no concept of money. They have no concept of funding. Worst of all, they have no true concept of how a true egalitarian type of government would work. But what they do have a clue towards and a ready understanding of is how to silence the opposition. Now, this is where the universities are being punished for the things that they've done in the past. This is where the universities are feeling the wrath of what it is they have created. Because if you stop and think about it for a moment, they have been teaching these students how to play the victim card for generations. I know that I have seen it during my time at university, which has been a little bit longer than I'd care to admit. I've been out now for about, 8 years. And then I started law school directly thereafter. But I remember my professors attempting to revise history, to teach that George Washington was barely literate and that our founding fathers were cruel and oppressive white slaveholding men, as if that was somehow the valid truth and that they did not want their students to go out and gaze upon the primary sources for themselves to discern the truth. But if you go back to what is the core principle of a true liberal arts education, it is to develop the critical thinking skills necessary to make important decisions and understandings for yourself. But this is not what the indoctrination teaches the students today. Rather, they are wholeheartedly trying to teach that the United States of America, by its very nature, is this this hateful place, this place where it's impossible for minorities to make a difference or to make a living for themselves. But stop and think about it, folks. Where does it say in the Constitution that these fundamental and unalienable rights don't apply to someone because of their skin color or due to their gender? It doesn't. Ultimately, the true natural law principles contained within the four corners of that magnificent document make no limitations. It says all people are created with these fundamental and unalienable rights. All people are endowed with these certain fundamental and unalienable rights by their creator. That is the truth. That is the ultimate part which will always shine through, and that is the part which will defeat these radical and extremist left-wingers who are doing everything in their power to strip every institution in the United States of its traditional meaning and thereby the good that it serves to purport to the American people. This is why Jeremy and I say that it is so important for you to gain the tools necessary to then develop a fluent working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution. It is because through this process you will gain the freedom to be able to determine whether these political groups, these educational institutions, or even the media itself is actually telling you the truth or is attempting to peddle an agenda which is actually detrimentally and diametrically opposed to everything that you believe and stand for and represent. These are dark and trying times here in the United States of America. It is clear that the social Marxists are so comfortable in their own skin that they no longer feel the need to try and hide their radical agenda from mainstream America. What's worse, we have this mainstream media that is actively, no, let's even say proactively agitating this, making it worse, perpetuating it, and giving these nefarious, selfish fools a platform from which to spew their nonsense. And the universities, being these weak and feckless people, are just capitulating, just giving the students what they want. But why is it that they always turn and put out their hands demanding more funding for so-called diversity training in our universities, more hiring for so-called minority groups, and never going on merit? Why is it that they always wish to push what the courts have deemed as positive discrimination? Now, I know that I spent quite a bit of time on this in my last solo flight, but I think it's of such importance that it bears reiterating here. The reason that they focus on all of this is because it's not about equality, it's not about justice, and it's certainly not about the truth. It is about concentrating more power. It is about allowing those who have acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner to escape responsibility for their deeds. Education is not a human right. Well, it may be a human right, but it's certainly not a fundamental and unalienable right. But I would even go so far to say that it's not a human right. It is a commodity, as it has been since the establishment of the academy system under under the great Greek philosophers of antiquity. Now, stop and think about that for a moment, folks. Throughout the course of human history, education has never been considered a right, but rather a commodity to be bought, sold, and paid for. Why would we change something that is so intrinsically part of human nature into something that is unrealistic or utopian in nature? And remember what Thomas More meant by utopia, meaning no place. So what they're saying is that we need to just have all these rights and have no way to pay for it, and therefore we're going to equally deprive everyone of having a decent education, irrespective of the fact whether they worked hard to achieve it or earned money for it or found ways to pay back these loans. You can never get something for nothing, because that is just not the way of the world. That is not reality. And common sense says just as much. Yet today's students have been so indoctrinated with these radical doctrines of left-wing philosophy that they are blinded to what the truth is. They continue to march down this path, making ever greater demands, and when the university systems capitulate to it, just as any time you appease someone, the demands are just going to grow louder and louder and more radical, until ultimately we have to reach a tipping point. And if we go over that tipping point, which would plunge the United States into this left-wing nonsense, then it will be all the more difficult to regain our country from these left-wing fools who hate everything about what this country stands for and represents. That is a dark, murky, and dangerous future, and we should not allow our institutions of higher learning to go further down the path of indoctrination, mediocrity, and ultimately perpetual failure. Rather, we should be demanding that they teach the truth as they were intended to, that you be objective in your approach to education to ensure that the students are endowed with the tools that are necessary for them to discern the truth for themselves. Self-reliability, self-responsibility, and self-accountability should be the part of any education. It doesn't matter whether it is science, technology, math, or any of your humanities or typical liberal arts degrees. Part of being a well-rounded individual is to be able to discern the truth for yourself, to think for yourself. But what we have been seeing throughout our ivory towers of education, the United States, for far too long now, is that they're not teaching them to think at all. They're just teaching them to soak in this Marxist nonsense and regurgitate it. Now, what the university systems have developed for themselves through tenure systems and through ever increasing tuition prices is a rather cushy deal. It's this idea of we will establish a great system here where we don't really have to produce capital, where we don't have to show success or proper functionality in what we're teaching, and we just thrust this on the people and the students. And then, oh, if the students go out and raise havoc, create problems, and act in a destructive manner, well, that's not our problem. That is the problem of the country, which we loathe and despise anyway, but we'll do whatever is necessary to take each thin dime from every decent, hardworking American citizen. Now, is it any wonder then that there are those within the right wing which completely feel that this is unimportant, that it's a good thing that the universities are feeling the wrath of the students? Well, yes, it's a good thing they're feeling it, but what is the outcome? We always have to keep our eyes on the bigger picture here, folks. We have to remember that it is the lifeblood of our nation that is hanging in the balance, and if we are not careful, it will reach the point of no return. And once that happens, I fear that our country might be lost forever. But again, keeping in mind that our entire constitutional representative Republican form of government is founded upon the undeniable natural law principles of our fundamental and unalienable rights, then we know that the truth will set us free, and that this false charade perpetuated and put forward by this radical extremist left will fail each and every time. It is because it cannot stand up to the scrutiny of the truth. Yet they are so radical right now, and they are so convinced of the rightness and righteousness of their cause that they are willing to cause any sort of anarchy, chaos, and destruction that they can if they think that it will promote their agenda. Folks, again, this ties back into the principles of propaganda as created and established by Joseph Goebbels. People, we also need to remember that Joseph Goebbels had a PhD. In other words, he was directly part of this educational establishment that has been pushing radical socialistic agendas for generations. But he said, whenever it helps your cause, no matter whether it is true or not, you continue to repeat a lie. And a lie that is repeated often enough will become in the minds of the people the truth. Of course, the problem is when the truth is standing next to it, when you have concrete examples from the annals of history demonstrating just how flawed and failed their ideology actually is, their entire facade begins to collapse from within. It implodes. Why? Because it can never have the authority of the truth. And that is the lesson that they don't want any of us to know. And that is why they have also been indoctrinating our students and future leaders for generations. Well, it is high past time that we put an end to this, that we provide a viable, realistic, real-world alternative to what these radical extremist left-wingers have been offering. Because if what they are offering is, and it absolutely is, because history demonstrates it in no uncertain terms, is a failed policy, then there can be no denying the fact that it will not work for the American people, that it will not be beneficial, that it will not help, and that ultimately it is doomed to failure. But what works? What is a solution to this system? What is something that can stand up to this as a diametrically opposite yet equally powerful force? Well, that's easy, folks. What stands in stark opposition to all of this is our shared United States Constitution. The truth is contained within the four corners of that document. It is undeniable. But we need to teach it again, and not in a negative light. And that, folks, may be the reason why our universities are suffering through this bout of unrest right now with the students. Why are we being expected to pay for these blatantly biased courses taught by hypocritical professors who are teaching from the Marxist playbook? That's not anything of value. It certainly doesn't help the United States of America. It just perpetuates this dangerous, greedy system that has cost the lives of millions of people wherever it has been attempted. Marxism does not work because it is not based on human nature. It does not take into account the perpetual desire of the people to have more. Whereas our system, based on the fundamental truths of our natural law system, takes into account human nature, and it attempts to channel it for good purposes, for good outcomes, to make the world a better place. That is what our founding fathers ultimately understood, and that is why the left cowers whenever they are encountered with the truth. And that is why you're seeing these movements that are just going around everywhere in our institutions of higher learning in America today, try and denounce and silence those who are opposed to them. And unfortunately, we have seen this spill over into the political arena. This ugly, cancerous doctrine of political correctness is nothing more than a tool of the radical and extreme left-wing and anti-American factions within the United States of America to silence their opposition, because they fear and loathe what the truth is, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to silence their opposition, to ensure that the truth is buried beneath the muck of so much crap. And if you really stop and think about it, that's exactly what they are offering the students. It's crap. It's not true education. It's not true knowledge. When I had a history professor stand before the class and pontificate, stating that George Washington was nearly illiterate, I stood up to him. And I know it's exceedingly difficult to stand up to the professors today, especially the way that they're running their classes. But I stood up to him and I said, then how do we have any record of the French and Indian War, as it's called here in the United States, or the 7 Years' War, as it's called in Europe, when in fact most of the first-hand accounts that we have in the primary sources came from General Washington's hands? He wrote the accounts that we have of the French and Indian War, and they were beautifully written, powerfully written. In fact, they were so popular that his memoirs from that time were second only to the Bible. Now that is saying something. And this professor had no idea about it. And when he tried to come back and say, well, no, that's not the way it really was, I pulled up the names of the documents because, you know, you have the internet in those classrooms. And at that time, I wasn't using it or utilizing it to engage in this social media malarkey or to not pay attention to the teachings. I was using that vast library and quantity of information to assist me to fact check these professors. And so I could pull up the sources and say, now, if this is what this source said, and if it was written by George Washington, who writes more beautifully than you do, Dr. So-and-so, then how can you say that he was practically illiterate? The only person in that room who was practically illiterate was the professor for teaching something that was an absurdity. Not only was it an absurdity, but it was a patent, flat-out, bold-faced lie. And that is what our students, these up-and-coming generations, are facing every time they set foot into a classroom in these ivory towers. These institutions of higher education were never meant to be a mold for indoctrination. They were never meant to be temples of Marxism. They were meant to be temples of objective truth and learning, to develop the skills that are necessary for one to embetter him or herself throughout their life. Now, there are still students who achieve this despite all of the malarkey and indoctrination that they encounter within the ivory tower. These are the students who are willing to go that extra mile to fact check what their professors are saying. I was fortunate that my parents taught me to question everything that your teachers say, because if they are embedded with an agenda, you need to know what that agenda is and to determine whether it would be beneficial for you or not. And if it is, why or why not? This is almost like the scientific method, although with the truth, it's much easier to see than any type of hypothesis a scientist might make. That's why you can get lies like global warming, because they will sit there and skew the scientific method and the results from their experimentation to push forward their agenda. Again, that is indoctrination or propaganda, not truth. The truth is ultimate, concrete, readily available, and readily discernible from anything else. And that, again, explains why these radical so-called social justice movements are hell-bent on silencing the opposition, because the opposition speaks the truth and their arguments cannot stand up to facts and truth. Whenever you look at the way that the radical and extremist fringes of the left argue, and irrespective of where they are in the world, they cannot stand up to the facts. They cannot stand up to hard facts and reality. They are completely unable to sell their arguments on those lines. So they base it purely on emotionalism. But emotionalism does not get you to the truth. It can easily allow you to be misled because you are blinded by passion. When you are blinded by passion, all reasoning gets thrown out the window, and you are impulsive, you are petulant, you are incapable of making decent decisions. You know, it's the same thing with intoxication. If someone is intoxicated, they are basically incapable of making sound, rational judgments, decisions, and determinations because they are incapacitated. If you are broiled up, surrounded with, and completely surrendered to sheer raw emotionalism, you are incapable of making rational decisions. And if you stop and think about it, that's exactly what the radical left wants. They don't want you making decisions for yourself. They don't want you rooting out the truth so that you can be a well-rounded individual capable of sustaining yourself. They want you to turn first and foremost to the government. They want you to be dumb, dependent, and completely reliant upon the auspices of a central government. But if we look back to the foundational principles of the United States of America, that is diametrically opposed, completely and totally the polar opposite of the type of system that our founding fathers had devised for the American people. It is a dangerous system that has no place in a free society. But if you look at our institutions of higher learning in America, is there anything about those ivory towers that conjures up images of freedom and liberty? Certainly not the way that they're being run now, not with this cancerous doctrine of political correctness that is poisoning the minds of the future generations, which will, one time or another, wield the reins of power in the United States. Then these fragile minds that are being placed out there will crumble. And it will ultimately serve to set this country onto a path of failure from which it will be all but impossible to return from. We are seeing these labors bear fruit on the part of, rather, these radical and extreme left-wingers. They have gained nearly every success that they have set themselves out to achieve, and it is at the expense of we the people. That is so dangerous and so concerning because they are tireless and relentless in their pursuit of indoctrination, corruption, and destruction. They are not attempting to empower the future generations of the United States. That much is clear. And it is also clear that somebody has blinded these students to reality, has blinded them to the type of harm for what they are actively seeking will cause them. It's childish. It's petulant. I'll even go out and say it's stupid. And, you know, I know that's not politically correct to stand there and insult the feelings of these precious little children. But they're not precious little children. They've become precarious monsters hell-bent on the destruction of everything that is good, fundamental, and congruent with the United States of America. And if we continue to allow them to perpetuate these myths, to demand ever greater things, and we continue to appease them as Neville Chamberlain appeased Adolf Hitler in the days leading up to World War II, we will be faced with a similar disaster. And folks, we can't just turn to our so-called leaders of the gutless opposition or GOP party. The gutless opposition party is part of the problem. At every given opportunity, these so-called leaders appease the radical and extremist leftists who are doing everything in their power to unravel the social fabric of the United States of America. It is undeniable to see that this is their goal. Obama didn't mince words when he said in the 2008 campaign that his ultimate objective was the fundamental transformation of the United States of America. That is exactly who he is. He is not attempting to hide what it is that he's seeking to achieve here in the United States. And if we continue to just bow down to them, they are going to gain ever and greater control and power, and they will lord it over the true sovereigns of this country, we the American people, without any sense of honor, integrity, or justice. And they certainly do not believe in the fundamental and unalienable right to free speech. And that ties in to their agenda to strip us of our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. Why would they want to take that away from us? Because that is the fundamental and unalienable right by which we defend all our other fundamental and unalienable rights. When the first shots of the American Revolution or the American War of Independence were fired, what were the British going to do? Why were the regulars marching towards Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts? They were marching towards those towns to confiscate the firearms of the citizens, because the citizens composed the militia, and the militia was the first line of defense against governmental tyranny, opposition, and despotism. And they were the first line of defense against any threat to the colony. It can also be seen again in the Battle of Gonzales, which was the opening shots of the Texas War of Independence in October of 1835. What were the Mexican army, or rather, what was the Mexican army going to that town for? To take away the cannon and arms of the Texian citizens, so that they could not stand in stark opposition to the edicts of the dictator Antonio Lopez de Santana. In each instant, those people who were standing up for liberty, justice, and a true sense of equality were attempting to defend their fundamental and unalienable God-given rights, which no earthly authority has the rightful authority to abridge, to encroach upon, to strip, or take away. And that is another reason why historical revisionists do whatever they can to bury that, to try and teach a lopsided, emotionally charged version of history to ensure that the future generations do not have an understanding of the true history, of the way that things actually developed and the way that things actually work. If they deprive these future generations from that, it leaves their minds more malleable to be more susceptible to the nefarious ends of indoctrination. And we are seeing this in our institutions of higher education at a greater rate and with more emphasis now than ever. The problem for the professors of these higher institutions of education is they may have pushed too much, too hard, too fast. And it is coming back to haunt them because these radicalized students now see them as the man or the establishment, that thing, that perpetual institution that is timeless and changeless that needs to be overthrown. They're seeing them as the oppressive group. But what is it that they couch all of this stuff in with? With social justice and Marxism. We've already heard that the leaders of this so-called Million Student March were absolutely inspired by the Black Lives Matter group. Folks, remember, this is the group that says you cannot say that all lives matter, that that's racist, hateful, and bigoted. But I can think of nothing more bigoted than to say that only one insular group of minorities matters. It should be that they matter and every other American citizen matters. That is the way that the true natural law of principles would require it. It is why that old adage goes that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men. We do not expect our laws to apply specifically and only to one group, but to all equal. If you want to know what true equal protection of the law or under the law is, it is just that. Irrespective of who you are as an American citizen, the laws apply to you equally as they would to any other American citizen, whether they be the president of the United States, a congressman, a senator, a governor, it doesn't matter. They must adhere to the fundamental law of the land just as every other citizen. And as we have oft times repeated here on the Wright Flyer, the true supreme law of the land, as per Article 6, Clause 2, is the United States Constitution and any laws made in pursuance thereof. It is so beautiful in its simplicity. And that is what makes it so difficult for these agent provocateurs of social Marxism and degenerism to tear it down. They have to try so very hard to strip us of the truth, to deny us these fundamental truths about human nature, government, and true liberty, equality, and the sense of justice. What they are peddling and offering doesn't resemble any of that, because they are not for that. They are diametrically opposed to any system that would offer true equality. Instead, they create these weasel words like white privilege. Folks, there is no such thing, because under the fundamental and unalienable rights that are possessed by each and every American citizen, none of us is more privileged than the other. Now, our mindset, our skills, our capabilities may be different than others, but true equality does not mean equal outcomes. It means that we have the equal opportunity to use the skills that are naturally inherent to us to make the best for ourselves, that no one just by title of birth could claim exclusivity upon the reins of power. When you stop and think about it, what it was that we were fighting in the American War of Independence was an old aristocratic system. Thomas Paine said that a monarchy is perhaps one of the worst systems of government ever devised by man. And you can also see that what we were fighting was this erroneous notion that sovereignty can ever be concentrated in the hands of a singular individual or family, that of the monarch. In the United States of America, the true, ultimate, and perpetual sovereigns are we, the people. All governmental authority has been delegated by we, the people. In other words, our government must operate with the consent of we, the people, and when it fails to do so, that government has become a rogue or illegitimate government. Again, these are the sorts of truths that you discover when you delve into the fundamental truths contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And again, it explains why these radical and extremist left-wingers are so hell-bent on obfuscating the truth when it comes to what our government actually is supposed to be, and how our nation came to be, and what our nation represents. These professors that attempt to teach that the United States is this cruel, wanton, terrible place are doing a great disservice to these students. They are telling these students bold-faced lies, and they are doing it with a straight face. They have no sense of shame, and that is why so many people feel that yes, these universities are getting what they deserve. But no, what these universities deserve is to have this entire system ripped out, not replaced with a more radical left-wing diatribe that we are seeing especially in the wake of the University of Missouri president being forced to step down, the interim president was seen with the protesters. He was with the group that was actively seeking to strip this man out of his position of office. And let's take it a step further. Why would the professors be so willing to turn their back on their serving or current serving president? Well, the man who stepped down from the University of Missouri had no higher education other than a baccalaureate degree. He had a bachelor's degree. That was it. He had been to undergraduate. He didn't have undergraduate school. He'd never been to graduate school. He never got a postgraduate degree. And these professors didn't like it that there was someone above them with a degree they considered lesser. But folks, a degree does not actually specify how intelligent someone is. Yes, I hold a Juris Doctor degree. Does that mean that I'm the smartest person alive? No. If I were deluded, I might think so. No, it shows that I have the discipline necessary to have gone through the numbers of years of education to successfully pass the courses to thereby achieve the degree. It shows that I have the skills that are necessary to sit for the bar, which I did and successfully passed. But that does not make me a greater person than someone who doesn't have those degrees. You know, to be a Supreme Court justice here in the United States, you don't need a law degree. You don't need a law license. You don't even need a bachelor's degree. You just have to be in good standing and of the right age, and you can be selected for the Supreme Court. That goes back to the true sense of egalitarianism, as our founding fathers intuitively understood it to be, and what would rightfully work for this country. But again, the way that the ivory tower as an institution operates is to set it up on this hierarchical system, which is nothing more than a false argument to say that, no, look at this piece of paper that I wield, that I spent so much time to earn. That gives me more intelligence and credibility to hold on to something. What a bunch of malarkey. It doesn't tell me anything about your character as a human being. It doesn't tell me whether you believe in the foundational principles of this country, or whether you believe in the natural law principles that has led the United States to such grandiose positions in the past, and such lofty heights in the past. They ultimately replace ultimate truths with penultimate concerns. And when that happens, you are predestined to go down a path of mediocrity and ultimately to perpetual failure. But that cannot be good for the American people. And that's certainly not the type of future that we want to see take root and hold here in the United States of America. Because if we allow ourselves to fall victim to such a system, then we are proving ourselves to be the cruel and callous country that they are trying to claim we are. Because what they are actually doing is projecting their own shortcomings onto those noble people who gifted us the greatest bequestment and inheritance that any people on this earth could inherit: our shared United States Constitution. And this is why they are so determined to push harder now than ever. But make no mistake about it, folks. What they are attempting to achieve is not good for the country or its people as a whole. It is this failed notion of cultural, political, and social Marxism that has failed and robbed people of their humanity wherever it has set foot. That is such a dangerous, perverse ideology that is so detrimental to human nature as a whole that it should be outright disregarded, outright refuted, outright rejected wherever its tenets and proponents attempt to thrust it forward. And that is why, again, it is so important that you gain the tools to allow you to develop a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Because knowledge, true knowledge, is power, not lies and indoctrinations, as we have seen in the ivory towers of education, but true knowledge empowers you to stand up to these despots, these tyrants, these potentates and fools, and say, no, enough is enough, and you cannot strip me of my fundamental and unalienable rights. And that is the God's honest truth, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the only purpose that Jeremy and I are seeking to achieve here at the Wright Flyer. Now, with that said, it has come time for us to begin our descent. I'm sending the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. As always, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly with us here at the Wright Flyer. I invite you to leave comments here on our Facebook page or YouTube page or Google Plus page, and I invite you to join me and Jeremy the next time we set out over the friendly airwaves to fly you over those airwaves in comfort and style, all while leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment. Thank you again for flying the Wright Flyer. We'll see you next time.